Excellent. Thank you so much. Really excellent material. So we're going to round out this first panel for today before we move on to the break with our last speaker, who is Josh Moody with the Partnership for the Delaware Estuary. I want to say that Josh, along with his colleague Leanne Hoff, has been a key partner with the EPA team's work with PDE. You folks that were there yesterday heard some of that work presented by Leanne and the rest of the team. Here, Josh is going to talk about some of the other activities and tools that PDE uses. Josh is the Restoration Programs Manager at the PDE, where he oversees a variety of programs, including the Delaware Estuary Living Shoreline Initiative and the development of tools and methodologies to identify and prioritize appropriate restoration interventions. He also conducts research on shellfish physiology and ecology to better understand how to integrate shellfish into a variety of restoration practices to make marshes healthier, shorelines stronger, and water cleaner. Over to you, Josh.
Thanks, Jordan. Can you see my slides correctly and can you hear me?
Yes, it all looks good.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. Thanks everyone for holding out right before the break. And I want to start off by thanking my co-author, Leanne Hoff from PDE as well, who's been a part of a lot of this work and the big picture thinking around it that I'm going to discuss today. And as Jordan mentioned, you know, I work for the Partnership for the Delaware Estuary, which is one of 28 national estuary programs. And as such, we're really guided by a CCMP here. And this was recently revised in 2019. And in our CCMP, in 6 different strategies and 2 out of the 3 goals, restoration is specifically called out. Now, since restoration is so important as a national estuary program, what's also important is to understand how to do effective restoration. So you need to understand what the vulnerabilities are, you know, where should you work, what are the exact issues in those places, and what are the appropriate tactics to get to them. And PDE is also a science-based organization. A lot of our projects involve data collection and synthesis, and our 3 major programs, very robust monitoring programs associated with them. The Mid-Atlantic Coastal Wetland Assessment, the Delaware Living Shorelines Initiative, and also our Freshwater Mussel Recovery Program. Now, a lot of these data are synthesized in a project-specific format or summarized in our technical report for the Delaware Estuary and Basin that comes out every 5 years. And a quick plug that a 2022 version will be coming out this year. And this TREB also includes a lot of the data that many of our partners collect. But looking at these data in terms of, you know, project-specific or effort-specific results is a little different than, you know, figuring out how to translate the wealth of this data into decisions on how and where to work. And that's what tools could really help us do. You know, tools can help us organize the information and help us inform prioritization through intervention. And that's what I want to do in the talk today, is kind of talk about 5 different tools that we're developing with various partners up in our area that sort of get at this process of identification to intervention. And first, I'm going to talk about the Coastal Ecological Restoration and Adaptation Plan, or CRAP, which helps us really think about where to work. Then there's WATCH, the Wetland Assessment Tool for Condition and Health that Leanne touched on yesterday. And that's, you know, trying to help us understand what the site-specific issues are that we're going to address in the places that we're working. And then the Living Shorelines Feasibility Model and the Marsh Futures Ecological Mapper, that once we understand what the issues are, can help us inform what are the appropriate tactics to go in and to apply to address those issues. Now, tools are great to have, but they're even better when they work together. You know, the complementary tools that can help you move along that pathway from investigation to intervention, you know, are really helpful in, you know, going from sort of the soup to nuts of the restoration activities. So, you know, this is a figure that's going to be on most of the remaining slides, and this is how I'm going to structure this talk, you know, moving across these various tools here at the bottom of the slide that are each associated with a different question, you know, associated with prioritizing and selecting restoration activities. But each is also informed by a variety of different data types and methodologies for collecting, which I can't really get into today, but I think are worth mentioning. So that idea of, where do we work? Those can be informed by data and different sort of work group activities, but also through conversations with lots of different types of stakeholders. And that's what's really captured and informed CRAP. Once you have a site, understanding the problem there can really be informed by a lot of those different types of monitoring data that PDE and a lot of other partners in our region collect that can be moved into Watch to inform that tool. And once you understand what the issue is, thinking about how to design there can be informed, for example, by a couple of different products from the Delaware Living Shorelines Committee, site evaluation documents, techniques and application documents, thinking about materials and design features that can help inform the living shoreline feasibility model. But then also, once you apply a tactic to a landscape, those tactics are going to have an effect on like the ecological interaction between the various subhabitats on a landscape. So what's going to be the effect of a tactic based on the modeled interactions between various habitat subcomponents? And that sort of understanding helps inform the Marsh Futures Mapper. And then ultimately, the question everybody wants to know, is it working? PDE's been involved in developing 2 different goal-based monitoring frameworks, one in Delaware, one in New Jersey, that can help people better understand if their projects are meeting specifically defined goals. So what we'll do in each successive slide is we'll start to move across this platform, starting with where should we work? And so I'm going to talk about CRAP related to that question. And that's a project through New Jersey DEP funded by an EPA Wetlands Program Development Grant led by Rutgers Center for Remote Sensing, and PDE is a partner through the New Jersey Coastal Resiliency Collaborative. And really what this project is it's going to ultimately be the virtual registry and a vulnerability map. So each year there's a nomination period where people can nominate either areas, kind of think polygons, or projects. You can think point data, and a project can be anywhere in a conceptual phase through a designed and implemented phase, where they'll be laid over top of a variety of different layers that get at some state-defined issues of concern. So say you're interested in working in blue carbon, you're going to want to select projects in areas that are of certain salinities and certain habitat types. If you're interested in areas that flood, there'll be different sorts of flooding layers. And the idea is you can go in and you can search either by different project type or goal, or you can query the database to bring up different sorts of places and projects that might meet certain goals that you have individually. So as an example, this is just a couple of graphics, of which there's many that you can explore in CRAP. Here, looking around the coast of New Jersey, we have it colorized by the different number of issues of concern that an area might be experiencing. So there's going to be areas experiencing a lot of issues, areas experiencing less, and then you have these different areas that are nominated by stakeholders and different projects by points, and all the different data that comes along with those. And through querying either the database or searching by issues of concern, you can start to zoom in on where it is that you want to work. Well, once you have a site, you have to understand what the problem is at that site. And so that's the Watch tool here. And this was funded through a NIFWIF Delaware Watershed Conservation Fund, partnering with the state of New Jersey and Delaware. And currently, Watch is available in an Excel-based format, but by the end of the year, it will be a web-based tool will be available as well. And as Leanne mentioned yesterday, Watch is really an ecological framework that helps you evaluate qualities that are fundamental for salt marsh function. So it looks at a variety of different attributes, and based on the relationships among them, it integrates them to come out to answer the question on whether you've provided evidence that there's probably an issue in this area and what sort of issue that may be. So in the spreadsheet, you would add information on a horizontal vertical position, bio and hydro, soil condition, water chemistry, and there's going to be a sediment attribute available when the tool goes online at the end of the year. You enter that information, it puts it together, and it gives you a couple of different types of output. It could let you know whether you have a problem today or maybe a problem tomorrow with a variety of the different attributes. And it also will give you some considerations around soil type and sedimentation for you to think about, how sedimentation affects vertical and horizontal position, how sedimentation and vertical and horizontal position are affected by TSS availability, decomposition processes, thinking about water chemistry and nutrients in terms of the appropriate ecological communities, both vegetation and shellfish. So the hope is after going through this tool, you would be able to have a good idea of where you have issues along the site that your intervention activity would have you address. And so once you have a site and you have an idea what the issue is, the question is, what are my design considerations of this site? And that's where the living shoreline feasibility model comes in. Currently, like watch, this is a Excel-based tool, but within the next year, that should be available on the same platform as watch. With these subsequent tools, the idea is they'll all be available on the same platform. So it would kind of be a one-stop shopping for moving through this process. So the living shoreline feasibility model, basically what it does is it tells you how much of a pain it's going to be to install and maintain a living shoreline at a particular location. And it's going to do that by cataloging differences either among sites, among stakeholder perspectives of a variety of different metrics. And those are going to let you know what aspects of your project you really need to do a lot of planning around, or what sort of team you really need to build to have an effective project. So there's 4 different categories of metrics. There's about 6 to 8 metrics in each category that the tool asks the user to evaluate. Like most living shoreline models, there's a lot of physical condition and biological, ecological metrics. There's also site access. How hard is it to get to the site? Can you walk out there versus have to take a boat? Do you need to send 36 emails to get access? Can you stage materials on the site? Some metrics around community resources. How does the community currently use the site? Is there outreach potential? Is there currently outreach? Is there various resources that can be used as leverage for funding? And the user goes in and collects the data and enters it in a spreadsheet, and then the model puts it together in a variety of different ways. One of the ways would be thinking about comparing across a variety of different sites here, how the different metric categories compare to each other. This site has a pretty good ecology, access, and resources, kind of tough physical conditions here. So you can compare that among different users or across different sites to help think about which sites you're going to work at and who you might want on your team. And then it'll also put them together to help you think about how complex the design will likely be, how hard it might be to maintain. So if you plot those together here, these would be sites that are, pretty easy to design and implement up here. These would be sites that would be a little more difficult. So you've got a place to work, you understand the problem, you've got a pretty good team together, you've got an approach set that you want to do, but the question is, what is going to be the effect of that tactic, maybe unintended, on the landscape? So this is new work that's just beginning, again, funded through NIFWIF, and our primary partners are Rutgers Center for Remote Sensing and Barnegat Bay Partnership, again, with the states of Delaware and New Jersey involved. And Marsh Features Mapper is going to be an ecological mapping tool that looks at landscape level health and then predicts how interventions at specific locations might affect the health and how that would radiate across the landscape. So I'll give a really quick simplistic example here. And let's say you've got a patch you have an area that you're interested in. It's got a few different types of subhabitats, some high marsh, some low marsh. Using some different tools that we have now, you can characterize the habitat types, look at conversion times and erosion rates, use watch to look at the health, and you can kind of bin them out as areas that are in pretty good health and areas that might be in poor health. Say you're interested in this high marsh area and you've done watch, and the problem probably is the elevation. You've gone through the feasibility model, and raising the elevation would probably get at the concern. So let's test it out here. So you go into the tool, you raise the elevation in the high marsh habitat to where you think it should be, and it doesn't quite get to that good functional state that you expect it to. Well, why not? Well, you also have this low marsh here that might be experiencing high erosion rates. And, elevating a marsh right next to an area that's highly eroding is going to keep that area at least slightly vulnerable. So you can go in, you can say, all right, well, I guess if we want to raise the elevation here and worry about this, we're also going to need to stabilize the low marsh. You can do that, and voila, things look good. Maybe you have an area that was looking good that maybe lost or became a little bit more vulnerable. So is it worth working in these areas at the expense of this one? You know, I don't know. But that is the conversation that hopefully the conversations this tool can help with. So those are basically the 4 different tools that I wanted to touch on today. Again, there's the monitoring frameworks, and we can provide links to those as well to help you understand how well your project's working at the end. But I did want to take just 30 seconds at the end to pop back to those topics and challenges slide that, you know, Jordan led and opened with yesterday. And, you know, it got me thinking, you know, is this work that we're doing, is it getting at these topics? And I think it is. You know, CRAP is directly working with stakeholders, and by building those relationships, you know, I think that is building capacity to see new projects, new relationships, new teams move forward to help deal with vulnerability. I think that the more of the quantitative tools, they're definitely helping to translate scientific information, and they're also helping to maybe not necessarily deal with uncertainty, but they're letting us know where the uncertainty is so we can make decisions on how much we're comfortable with. And then with the monitoring frameworks here at the end, you know, I think, you know, when you monitor in a standardized way and start to evaluate how certain techniques work in a variety of conditions, or how, you know, a variety of different tactics at a specific type of site might work, you do start to reduce barriers and create opportunities for the implementation of different sorts of restoration activities, including innovation ones, which sometimes can be a bit of a hard sell. So a lot of work still to do here, but that is the direction that we're moving in. And with that, I think we can take some questions.
Perfect. Thanks, Josh. Great. You can mute Josh and give the feedback. Thank you so much to Christine and Josh, our second pair, and to all of our panelists. I think we have a few minutes for discussion and questions before we move on to our break.
Yes, thank you, Jordan. And we just have a few minutes, and I'm going to just jump right into the Q&A. Joan, anything in the chat for our speakers?
Yes, let me just go back. There was a question for Christine from Kevin. Is green print used by the Middle Chesapeake Sentinel Landscape Partnership for targeting land conservation priorities?
And I don't believe that data was used directly, but some of the same data sets we used to define that map likely were.
Okay, yeah, I see. Sorry, looks like you answered that as well. And then there's a question here for Josh. Does WATCH indicate at what date in the future a particular salt marsh will become open water as sea level rise continues?
Yeah, I obviously didn't have time to get into most of those tools, but the short answer is yes. So the different data that you put in, you know, it's a real boots on the ground tool. So you'll put in some data on the current conditions, and then you'll put in some thresholds that you're interested in. And then really the key is the trajectory data. Like I mentioned, we have the Mid-Atlantic Coastal Wetland Assessment that we can get a lot of good trajectory data from. There's also the Reference Wetland Database or New Jersey DEP. But once you can put in some trajectory data, then in WATCH you can program different time frames. You can say, all right, let's look out 10 years. And those time frames, especially in the vertical position, also account for sea level rise. I think the default is 4 millimeters, but you can change it. And so what you can do is by changing that time frame, that window you're looking in, you can start to see when different attributes might start to show deficiencies and when their vulnerabilities might become explicit. So you can play around with that a little bit in the tool. It's pretty interactive.
Okay, thank you. There's a question here for Christine. Does the accounting for ecosystem services include actual monetary values tied with ecosystem services, as well as those not in the economic system? For example, fish nursery area.
We focused our assessment on kind of the non-market externalities of habitat. So that was the piece that we took. So we weren't looking at, hunting or fishing income derived from, activities on forest land. So it was more focused on the non-market services, areas that we thought, and we've been hearing the call for needing that economic valuation that we don't traditionally get from standard kind of market signals.
Okay, thank you. And the one other thing I saw posted in the chat was that Jackie put in the chat a link to a project webpage for the EESLR study that Christine presented on.
That's great, and thanks for doing that, Jackie, and thanks for highlighting that, Joan. Christine and Josh, those are wonderful presentations. Thank you again. Folks, we're about to take a lunch break. When we come back, we will have 4 additional speakers who will present on behalf of our Northeastern partners. And then there'll be an interactive session. We'll be really harnessing the collective wisdom of the participants. So that'll be a really important part of our day as well. And we'll come back at 12:35.
1:35.
1:35. Look at that. Thank you, Jordan. 1:35. Jordan, did you want to add something before we break?
No, that was perfect. And so we'll begin promptly at 1:35 Eastern time. And thank you again so much to our panelists.
Thank you.
See you soon, everyone.